You might think the United States and Canada are the closest allies in the world. But what if I told you that behind the scenes, something very different is happening right now? What if this isn't just a partnership anymore, but the beginning of a quiet economic battle that could reshape North America forever? Because over the last few months, small decisions, policy shifts, and strategic moves have started to send a clear signal, and most people haven't even noticed it yet. This is not a loud conflict. There are no headlines screaming war. But if you connect the dots, a very different picture starts to appear. And before we go deeper, if you want more videos that break down hidden global power moves like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Maple and Eagle. Because what we're about to uncover might completely change how you see North America. Now here's where things start to get interesting. For decades, the United States and Canada have shared one of the strongest economic relationships in the world. Every single day, billions of dollars in goods, energy, and services move across the border. Factories depend on each other. Supply chains are deeply connected. And politically, both countries have always presented a united front. But lately, that unity has started to show cracks. At first, it didn't look like much. A trade disagreement here, a policy shift there. But then, something changed. The tone started shifting. The decisions became more strategic. And suddenly, it wasn't just about cooperation anymore. It started looking like positioning. Think about this. When a country begins to rethink its trade priorities, adjust its economic partnerships, and quietly strengthen its own industries, it's usually not random. It's preparation. Preparation for a future where it cannot rely on old systems the same way it used to. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. Canada, for example, has been making moves that suggest it wants more control over its own economic future. Instead of depending too heavily on one partner, it's exploring new trade relationships, strengthening internal industries, and securing its energy position globally. At the same time, the United States is also shifting its focus. Domestic production, economic security, and supply chain independence have become major priorities. And when two closely connected economies start focusing inward at the same time, friction is almost inevitable. But here's the key question. Is this just a natural evolution of two strong economies? Or is it the early stage of something bigger? Because history shows us something important. Economic conflicts don't always start with loud announcements. They start quietly, small policy changes, strategic investments, subtle shifts in alliances, and by the time people realize what's happening, the balance of power has already changed. Now imagine this scenario. Two countries that have relied on each other for decades suddenly begin to compete in key areas: energy, manufacturing, technology, trade routes, each side trying to secure its own advantage, not openly, but strategically. That's not just competition. That's the foundation of an economic battle. And what makes the situation even more interesting is timing. The global economy is changing faster than ever. Supply chains are being restructured, energy markets are shifting, and countries are no longer just thinking about growth. They're thinking about resilience and control. In this kind of environment, even the closest allies can start acting differently. Because at the end of the day, every country has one priority: its own future. And that brings us to something most people are completely overlooking. What if this isn't about conflict at all? At least not in the traditional sense. What if this is about preparation? About positioning for a world where economic power matters more than ever before? Because if that's true, then what we're seeing right now between the United States and Canada might not be temporary. It might be the beginning of a long-term shift. A shift where cooperation still exists, but competition quietly grows underneath. And if that's happening, then the real question is not whether this silent economic war exists. The real question is how far it will go. And more importantly, who stands to gain the most from it? Because in every economic shift, there are winners and there are losers. And right now, the game is just getting started. Now here's where things start to take a more serious turn. Because once you look beyond the surface, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. This isn't just about trade numbers or policy speeches anymore. It's about control. Control over resources, supply chains, and the future direction of economic power in North America. Think about energy for a second. Canada is one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. Oil, natural gas, minerals. These are not just economic assets. They are strategic advantages. In a world where energy security is becoming more important than ever, countries that control resources suddenly gain leverage, and that changes everything. Because when one country holds critical resources and another depends on stable supply, the relationship becomes more complicated. It's no longer just partnership. It becomes negotiation, sometimes even quiet pressure. Now combine that with what's happening inside the United States. There has been a growing focus on bringing manufacturing back home, reducing reliance on external partners, and securing domestic industries. On paper, that sounds like a strong move, but in reality, it also means something else. Less dependence on countries like Canada, And when dependence decreases, influence shifts. This is where the balance starts to change. For decades, both countries benefited from deep integration. Factories in one country relied on parts from the other. Energy flowed across borders. Trade was smooth, predictable, and massive in scale. But now that system is slowly being reevaluated. Not broken, but adjusted. And adjustments like these don't happen without consequences. Because every time one side tries to become more independent, the other side has to respond. Sometimes by strengthening its own position, sometimes by finding new partners, and sometimes by quietly pushing back. And this is exactly where things start to feel less like cooperation and more like competition. Now imagine being in Canada's position. You're closely tied to one of the largest economies in the world. That relationship has brought stability and growth for years, but at the same time, it also creates a risk. If too much depends on one partner, then any shift on their side can have serious consequences. So what do? You diversify. You explore new trade routes. You build relationships with other global players. You invest in industries that give you more independence. And slowly, without making noise, you reduce your vulnerability. But here's the interesting part. When Canada does this, the United States notices. And when the United States notices, it adjusts too. And just like that, a cycle begins. One side moves, the other responds. One side strengthens, the other repositions. Not openly, not aggressively, but strategically. And over time, these small moves start to add up. Now here's something most people don't think about. Economic battles today don't look like they did in the past. There are no clear start or end points. There's no official announcement. Instead, it's a constant process of shifting priorities, building leverage, and protecting interests. And that's what makes this situation so important, because it's happening quietly. No major headlines, no dramatic speeches, just decisions, one after another, slowly changing the landscape. And if you zoom out for a moment, the bigger picture becomes clearer. North America is one of the most powerful economic regions in the world. What happens between the United States and Canada doesn't just affect them. It affects global trade, energy markets, and even political alliances. So if there is even a slight shift in their relationship, the impact can be massive. Now think about the future. What happens if this quiet competition continues to grow? What happens if both countries keep focusing more on independence and less on integration? Does the partnership weaken? Or does it evolve into something completely different? Because here's the reality. Strong alliances don't disappear overnight. They change slowly, they adapt. And sometimes they become more complex, with cooperation on the surface and competition underneath. And that's exactly what this looks like right now. A relationship that still works, but is no longer as simple as it used to be. And that brings us to the most important part of this entire story. Because everything we've talked about so far, the shifts, the strategies, the quiet moves, they all lead to one big question. What does this actually mean for the future? Not just for governments, but for businesses, industries, and everyday people. Because when economic dynamics change at this level, the effects don't stay at the top. They move down. They affect jobs, prices, investments, and opportunities. And in the next part, we're going to break down exactly that. What this silent economic battle could lead to, who might benefit from it, and who could end up losing the most. Because the real impact of this story hasn't even begun yet. So now the real question is, what happens next? Because everything we've talked about so far, the quiet shifts, the strategic moves, the growing focus on independence, all of it is leading towards something bigger. And the truth is, we're only seeing the early stages of it. When two major economies like the United States and Canada begin to adjust their relationship, the impact doesn't stay limited to government decisions. It spreads outward into businesses, industries, and everyday life. Let's break that down. Imagine a future where supply chains are no longer as tightly connected as they once were. Companies that used to rely on smooth cross-border trade might suddenly face delays, higher costs, or new regulations. That affects production, it affects prices, and eventually, it affects consumers. Now think about energy. If Canada strengthens its position as an independent energy supplier and expands its global partnerships, it could gain more influence on the world stage. That sounds like an advantage, and in many ways, it is. But it also changes how energy flows within North America, and when energy dynamics shift, entire industries feel it. At the same time, the United States pushing for more domestic production could create a different kind of pressure, more competition, more focus on internal growth, and potentially less reliance on external partners, even close ones. So what does that create? A situation where both sides are strong, but also more competitive with each other. And this is where things get really interesting. Because not all competition is negative. In some cases, it leads to innovation, growth, and stronger economies. But when competition exists alongside deep interdependence, it becomes complicated, very complicated. Because now every decision has two sides. A move that benefits one country might create pressure for the other. A strategy designed for independence might reduce cooperation. And over time, those small effects start to build into something much bigger. Now here's something most people don't realize. The biggest changes in global power don't happen suddenly. They happen gradually, then all at once. And that's why this moment matters. Because right now we are in that gradual phase. The phase where everything still looks stable on the surface, but underneath, the foundation is shifting. And once that shift reaches a certain point, the change becomes impossible to ignore. So who actually benefits from all of this? On one side, countries that adapt quickly, that invest in their industries, secure their resources, and build flexible strategies. They stand to gain the most. They become more resilient, more independent, more influential. But on the other side, there are risks. If coordination weakens too much, it could create inefficiencies. If competition turns into tension, it could slow down growth. And if trust starts to fade, even slightly, the entire dynamic changes. And that's the balance both countries are trying to manage right now. Cooperate, but protect their own interests. Stay connected, but not dependent. Grow together, but also compete when necessary. It's a delicate balance. And history shows it's not always easy to maintain. So where does this leave us? It leaves us at a turning point. Not a dramatic, headline-making turning point, but a quiet one. The kind that only becomes obvious when you look back and realize this is where things started to change. And that's exactly why we're talking about it today on the Maple and Eagle, because understanding these shifts early gives you a completely different perspective. It helps you see what's coming, not just what's already happened. And right now, the signals are clear. The United States and Canada are not breaking apart. They're not enemies, but they are evolving. Their relationship is becoming more complex, more strategic, and yes, more competitive. A silent economic battle doesn't mean open conflict. It means positioning, it means preparation, and it means that the future of North America might look very different from its past. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this growing competition will make both countries stronger? Or could it create bigger problems down the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this breakdown helpful, share this video with someone who follows global politics. Because most people still have no idea this shift is happening. And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Maple.